Hello and welcome to Tattva Conversations and Explorations. For our fifth episode on sociology, we sat down with Professor A.R. Vasavi. Professor Vasavi is a social anthropologist based in Karnataka, India. She received her master's from the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, and a PhD in social anthropology from Michigan State University, USA. She was a faculty with the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore from 1997 to 2011, and a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, and visiting fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Diversity and Religion in Germany. Her academic interests are in sociology of India, agrarian studies, and sociology of education. Her publications include Harbingers of Rain, Land and Life in South India, The Inner Mirror, translations of Kannada Writings on Society and Culture, Differentiation and Disjunction, Interrogating India's Education System, among others. She is currently a member of the Punarchith Collective that works on alternative learning and is based in Karnataka. We talked about her association and disjunction, integral understanding of what sociology is, her approach to her discipline, how her work has influenced her worldview, how society shapes an individual, the potential in rural India that's currently unutilized or underutilized, a loss of self among the youth of rural India, what education means to her, insights on the current Indian education system, about children as citizens and their rights as citizens, what sociology has been able to help her understand about human nature and our world. We hope this conversation can help the listeners see the Tattva, or the true essence of sociology, and its ability to help us understand the meaning and purpose of society and our own role and responsibilities to make it better. Hello, Professor Vasavi. Welcome to Tattva.
Hello, Disha. Thank you for organizing this.
Oh, we're very happy and we really look forward to this conversation, for which I've prepared a bunch of questions for you. So I just get started with that.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So my first question to you is a basic question. What is sociology?
Sociology is a discipline which has multiple approaches to understanding society. And I stress understanding, not explaining, has very different from the scientific approach. It's a way in which we understand society not in its manifest forms only, but also in understanding the tacit underlying relationships, meanings, the symbols, and the orientation and some of the trends in society. That basically is what sociology is about.
Okay. And how would you define your own approach to the subject?
Yeah. I have over the years, of course, having been schooled in many formal methods, none of those which I have absorbed or internalized over the years. I have chosen to combine two major approaches. One of which draws from C. Wright Mills, 1940s well-known sociologist based in the US, who wrote very seminal books, in which he describes sociology as an art, as an approach, in which you combine both public history or history itself with personal details. So the structure and the biography has coming together. For example, the structure of the society, which constitutes a biography of a person, or biographies of groups of people. This has been particularly useful for me because it has helped me to mesh and to integrate the extent to which macro situations need to be understood through micro, trends or issues. So, how do the macro and the micro come together? And this has been very useful for me. I have also over the years been influenced, although I had been reading about it, but not in a very focused way, was phenomenology, which is the study of phenomena in its various forms. But phenomenology lays emphasis on how to understand what is called objective reality, which is subjectively experienced. So it's a combination of the objective and subjective, and then representing that to the other larger world. So that really has been the way in which, for me, sociology has been a craft, an approach of both living my life and also of studying other societies.
Very interesting. So, yeah, this is a question I generally keep for like towards the end of the conversation. But I think I'd like to ask you this. So, how has this approach, like you yourself said, how has it influenced your own way of how you look at life?
It's really been very useful for me. I won't even say useful, much more than that. It has been uh, uh, a meaningful approach, a meaningful pathway for me, a meaningful kind of lens to my own life and to understanding other people's lives. It has helped me, for example, question my own kind of privilege I've had, the kind of privileged class background I've had. It's made me, in many ways, come to terms with certain circumstances I have faced, certain events or incidents in my own life, to see that not as personal but as also being constituted by structural factors and issues. It's been a way for me now currently to look beyond life has a lifestyle, that I see life and look for leading a life that has much more meaning and substance, in which relationships are also important. So I think this is the way in which sociology has really been a guiding force for me personally.
So, if you could share some insights in terms of how the society shapes an individual.
It shapes us both in overt ways, in not only how we look. I mean, that's the standard way in which we come from certain regions, or from a certain stock of people. I don't want to use the word race, much of which are the physically inherited features and characteristics we have. But also, a lot of it is through the symbols, the tacit rules and norms which we follow, the way in which customs, practices, and rituals shape us and guide us, the kind of worldviews which are endowed to us through our families, through our communities, the ways in which every individual's personhood is also constituted by the society. Later, we may negotiate it, but for a long time, for much of our lives, we are marked by the society, not only which we are born into, but the society in which we even choose to live in. So the social marking of individuals is very strong, although many people may deny it. But all of us are social animals.
Sure, sure. So, a lot of your work has been done on issues concerning rural India, and this goes way back. I think sometime in late 1980s till now,
89.
right? You're
Yes.
still working. So it'll be nice to know the
Yeah.
essence of your work, along with some of the key insights that if you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I began in 88. So since 88, 89, doing field work, especially in rural India, I've looked at mostly my approach, or my key kind of orientation, or what I would say my own contributions has been threefold. One of which is to emphasize very strongly that until now, rural India has been seen as a problem, and it has never been seen as having its potential, its rich diversity of knowledge and skills. It's only been seen as poor and backward and as a laggard, etc. So that needs to be changed very substantially, to look at both not only the richness of rural India, but also its potential, but also has a foundation itself for a democratic nation. Secondly, I also want to stress that much of the impact of both colonialism and in the independence period, the post-colonial period, rural India has been there has been a certain kind of inversion that has happened. Inversion in the sense, what is really negative, disadvantage has been sustained and retained and reproduced. What is what is high potential and its advantages has been largely erased. For example, rural India and also agrarian India is based on the caste system. The caste system and structure defines it. And that has been reified in many, many ways, not only through the agricultural policies, but through all the other policies, the political systems, etc. So the deficit has been retained and is reproduced. What is positive is the very rich repertoire of knowledges and skills, which were going beyond agricultural knowledge, knowledge about medicine, flora, fauna, conservation, architecture, smithy, weaving, basket making, you just name it, we had it. I mean, we were an industrial nation before the British colonialism. We had multiple types of industries. All of these have collapsed. And today what you see is a very strong erasure of those knowledge systems, and you see an erasure of identities linked to that. You see people being rendered into just subjects who have no skills, who must be made literate through formal education, etc., or through development programs and policies. So it's that inversion which really I think is very problematic about the ways in which mainstream approaches, policies, government, or even most people see rural India. That the future really lies in not only just future for rural India and rural citizens or just for farmers, but the future of an India in which we can go beyond the simplistic globalization, high industrialism, or even service-based industries, etc., is to look at the potential that rural India has in addressing global warming, addressing the decline of capitalism as a major system, the other multiple kinds of problems that we have. So it's to recognize those potentials and build on those. I think that is really what has scope.
Wonderful. So, what I would like to ask from you, Zia, so you're saying that there is a certain way in which rural India has been seen. So, people
Yeah.
who are not living, who don't belong to the rural parts of India, have a way of looking at rural India,
Yeah.
and it's kind of putting what they see in a certain box. And that is coming in the way of progress of rural India, of change. That would be very welcome. How would you say that people of rural India are viewing themselves? Where do they see their own position in the world as it's changing and transforming in front of them? How do they see themselves?
Currently, there's a lot of confusion because this kind of processes of erasure that has set in has made them feel not only redundant uh, in the larger nation state and their role as citizens, but also they have become to have a lot of self-doubt. For example, there is no confidence in their own knowledge systems. There is no confidence that their way of life can be, has been sustainable, for example, and can be sustainable in the future. So there's a lot of submission to a dominant mainstream agenda, which is primarily industrial, which is primarily urban oriented, which is mainstream with, when we talk about education, I'll talk about mainstream mass education, which is of very poor quality. It is an absence of their own vicinity, of recognizing the value of their own locality, of not only the biodiversity or the natural geophysical setting, but also the cultures that go with it, especially the decentralized local cultures that have gone with it. So there is a form of submission to the dominant mainstream, which is what has become so troublesome. And we see it as being manifested in the submission to mainstream political agendas, cultural identities, not just to a political party, but to the ethos of those political parties. This really is expressed there.
When you talk about the revival of knowledge which is contained in rural India, which is sustainable in essence, which has a lot of value that we banked on for centuries. When you talk of its revival, bringing it back, do you mean in terms of integration, like how it will find its place in the changing world today, and that it has a place in the changing world today? That's how you mean it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, not in a fundamentalist way at all. Even those have to be tweaked to the present situation. Yeah.
And if you can look or maybe cite certain individual examples, if you've seen such, say, for example, a person in rural India, let's say a young man in his 20s. So he's aware that he doesn't have a lot of opportunities in his village, and he's made more aware of it because of what he sees on media. He sees people having a certain kind of a life, a certain kind of access to things, access to, at least in terms of possibility of a wider scope of access. So when this person sees this and he wants that because he thinks that's good, it's better, it's something he can also have, then maybe he migrates to a city, to the nearest city, to the nearest bigger town next to his village. And if he goes there, then there is still the loss of identity continues. right? The loss of
Yes,
identity
very much,
continues,
very
and
much.
then the bridge that we are trying to build, that people like yourself are trying to build, uh, there is just a sudden leap where probably the man doesn't not only lands on his feet but is completely lost. Does that happen?
Yeah, very much. Not only are you lost, but over time, especially the poor, the working class, the ones in the informal economy, are depleted of themselves. They are, they give in their labor. Many of them return as paupers, and that is what we saw during COVID when large
Mm-hmm.
numbers wanted to come back to the village because no longer are urban areas able to absorb such large numbers of the working class. They're absorbing their labor, but they don't provide them enough security. It's an inadequate livelihood. And moreover, it's for many of them, it's a meaningless life. So it is again another form of erosion that is taking place there also.
And then there's a very interesting and I don't know, unexpected emergence of events where a lot of people who had worked in, let's say, these MNCs, sometimes in India, sometimes even abroad, are trying to come back to their, native places, their villages. They're making a return and they're starting off
Yeah.
as farmers. And do you see that trend also catching up? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are a lot of people, especially we see a lot of what we called, burnt out IT people coming back. It's
Mm.
kind of common, especially in the Karnataka countryside around the peripheries of Bangalore. And it's very understandable because they are also escaping, these sort of monolithic context in which they work and in which, they are burnt out. They've given large amounts of time and energy and they want to find something to do much more than, being in an air-conditioned room. It's a healthy trend. It's important. And many of these young people stand now as, beacons for a lot of rural India, youth who want to leave, who see no future in rural India or in agriculture. So we have many friends who are doing that and doing excellent work.
Mm.
One really has to admire them because it's not easy. Even you could be very well heeled, have a lot of money, but still to work the land, to make it productive, to give employment, to rejuvenate land. All these are, it's tremendous work. And I think in many ways it's a good trend. Some of them are really role models for many people around them.
Mm-hmm. So, just staying on this topic of rural India a little more, we were talking about knowledge, ancient knowledge
Yeah,
that has been with us for so long, and it is kind of on standing on slightly shaky legs right now. What
yeah,
To what extent has the damage been done? So, what I mean is, like, are there forms of knowledge in any sector, education, weaving, all the different sectors
yeah.
that you name, that we have lost completely and might not be able to recover at all? Has that happened?
I don't know which if any knowledge is completely lost. I'm more familiar with ones which we think are quite viable.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in agriculture, we
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of it, not a lot of it, some in very small pockets of the kind of work we are also trying to do, is agriculture that was sustainable, that was very grounded, very locale specific, which was very sophisticated. It was attuned to the larger ecology of climate, to the local soils, and availability of natural resources, water, etc. But knew how to grow, which crops to grow, when to grow, but also highly nutritious crops without chemicals, without artificial inputs, etc. So similarly, you see that in many forms of medicine. For example, the bone setters who live in
Yeah.
parts of rural India, they're quite well known in Karnataka,
Mm.
or people who treat, for illnesses in which Western allopathy does not have cure. People who treat jaundice
Mm.
through herbs, which are family secrets that are passed down. Jaundice hepatitis is not treatable in the Western allopathy system at all. And here these are so there are pockets of repositories of knowledge which are still there, which are still utilized, but they need to be scaffolded, they need to be protected and supported and promoted much more as viable forms of knowledge.
Mm.
Ones which are completely gone, I think right now I can't remember if there's something because I know smithy is there, all kinds of smithy, blacksmithy,
Mm.
making jewelry, gold, silver that is used quite a lot. But it's just that the number of people in these is very, very low. For example, basket making or, other weaving, we know it's still there. There are skills, there are, skills spread all over the country, but they are facing the problem of not having high quality organic cotton available to them. Because 92% of cotton we grow in India is now GM cotton. That does not go into traditional kind of spinning and weaving. So there is now a disconnect between the availability of material and the available knowledge systems and skills that are there.
Right.
So that also needs to be looked at.
From this, I'd like to move on to a book that you've written, which was titled Differentiation and Disjunction, Interrogating India's Education System. So, but before I get into what the book is about and all of those things, I'd like to know from you what education means to you personally, and why, and what kind of education do you think is important?
Personally, education for me was not just literacy, but learning. First of all, learning about oneself and, understanding oneself very deeply, understanding one's emotions, capabilities, abilities, and to use that as an expression of many of those abilities, to have the opportunity, but also to use it. That really, for me, is education, and which is what one should strive to do when you teach or you have students. So with that, for me, the pedagogies that should be used, and it can be across disciplines, doesn't have to be discipline specific, is to make learning reflexive, which is to think about things, not just accept it, not this passive learning which we have. To every idea that is given, every knowledge, you think about it. How should it be used? What is its significance? What impact will it have? What would be its long-term future, etc. But also to make it relational. How do I use it? How do I relate to various domains, to various people? But in some ways also to make that person, the learner, become engaged with the world, not to withdraw from the world. So reflexive education places that onus on you to also be an engaged, empathetic person.
Beautiful.
So that for me is the way in which I define education.
Beautiful. So the systems of education, particularly in rural India, in ancient India, let's say, in a different time than now, do you think this was the core approach that they had, that what you study should help you engage better with the world? So through it helping you learn who you are, you can find your place in the world. Would you say that was the core approach of the education system, ancient education system?
I don't know which ancient one. If you're talking about the Indian one, it was not, the one we've read about, and we know its impact continues even now. It was a very exclusive system. It schooled you into an occupation which was very caste-based. It sought to just reproduce knowledge and reproduce yourself in the image of your ancestors or in the image of your guru or the older person. It gave you very little scope for creativity and individual expression. So I think, quote unquote, ancient Indian education system was very deeply problematic. That is especially the formal learning. But there were also informal ways of learning, which were based on crafts and artisanship and other kind of skills that you had, in which I think there was much more scope for creativity. For example, you see it among smiths, people who do all kinds of smithy. They do much more creative work. So I think we need to look at what kinds of education for which kinds of people and what impacts they have had. But the very classical education, which was learning, which was reading, literacy based, was very, very narrow. It really focused on reproduction.
Right. Right. So now coming back to the book, I think the first obvious question is, what did your interrogation reveal to you about India's education system?
Yeah. Basically, the book is a culmination of more than 25 years of field-based work in the sociology of education. So I was not seeing it typically through a pedagogue or a teacher's view. It wasn't just about how children or students learn, but the context, the institutional context, the cultures, the agency, and what happens, what is the impact, what kind of transactions happen in educational institutional settings. So that was basically my approach, very sociological, in which there were two key findings, which are the part of the titles of the book. I talk about differentiation, educational differentiation, which really is the foundation or the hallmark of the Indian education system. I show how our educational system is the most hierarchical and the most differentiated in the world. We have something like 9 boards of examination systems. We have more than 16 types of schools with which children go to. It ranks from the most poorly funded ashrama school for Adivasi or tribal children to the most exclusive and expensive international schools, which are in metropolitan areas and cater to global elites with global aspirations. So in between, you have a range of public, religious denomination schools, government schools, special residential schools, and a whole range of them, all of which show that people are sending their children to schools which are aligned with their class status rather than common. So the idea of such a differentiated hierarchical education system defies the idea of education being a leveler, defies the idea that all children can come through to a system in which they can be endowed on their capacities, not really on their parents' paying capacity, and which gives everybody an equal, not only equality of education opportunity, but an opportunity for realizing themselves, these capacities, their interests, their capabilities that they have. So that is why I call it differentiation. A result of such a differentiated system, there are many results, but I look at disjunction, in which I highlight the way in which this differentiated system leads to ultimately to multiple disjunctions, both at the individual student life level, at the societal level, but also at the national level. At the individual level, where large numbers are eliminated, they don't get an opportunity, for either higher studies or for good quality education or ultimately jobs. They're frustrated. This really is one of the key reasons as to why we are seeing large numbers of suicides now are among youth, because of the frustrations that they're going through in the educational system, and then with the lack of employment, etc. At the societal level, you see a lot of alienation. For example, rural people saying, our children are not coming back. For example, why now educated girls don't want to be in the rural areas because they don't want to do rural agrarian work, which would be looking after cows or carrying water or doing agriculture related work, because they say we're literate, we should not be doing manual work, because our educational system devalues labor so heavily that it has created this anti-manual labor attitude that is spread across the country. Finally, you see it manifested at the national level, where you actually have some industries which are desperate for people, but they don't get qualified people. So you have multiple series of examination systems. All IT companies have their own entrance exams. This is apart from the number of entrance exams that all youth go through. So the fact is that quality is not inbuilt into these systems. So the biggest disjunction is that we have made access relatively good. It's massification without an assurance of quality. So at the national level, it also then is bearing a huge cost that we have. Finally, I want to say one of the biggest tragedies we are witnessing now is that we now have generations and large pools of youth who are not competent to read and write in their own mother tongue, nor are they competent to read, write, and represent themselves in English, because of this whole demand for English, going to very poor quality English medium schools. This is what the kind of disjunction, massification has led to. So basically, I've tried to look at differentiation has a structure, but disjunction has the impact or as the result of such a differentiated system.
So, apart from making these observations over 25 years of your working life, would you also be able to cite any practical ways in which dissolving this can at least be initiated, or has it already been initiated and you're seeing some positive changes, and where are we going from here?
At a macro policy level, no. It hasn't. For example, new National Education Policy 2020, which is our most recent education policy, does not address this issue at all. In fact, it reinforces it. It says online education is available. You can go get dual degrees. You can do an ordinary degree in a college, but you can apply for a second degree online. It's a dilution of standards. In many ways, it really reinforces a very hierarchical system. It promotes privatization of education. It does not give enough support to the reservation system. So I think as a policy, as a macro structural approach, no, I think things are worse and have worsened over the past few years. And we see it now, what is unfolding are some of the more negative kind of policies that are coming out. But they're small islands, and this is really to recognize and commend those few people who are working despite these odds to make education not only inclusive but meaningful education, meaningful learning systems. There are many, many endeavors across India. I know in Pondicherry there are some of them, but across India, every state has some of these at the school level. Mostly they're at the school level, elementary education level. A few at the college level also. But really, these are just drops in a vast ocean.
I think one such initiative is Punarchith Collective, of which you are a part of. Could you tell us something more about it?
Yeah. We started this, a group of us, about 5 of us, mostly because we felt very frustrated working in mainstream institutions, academic research work, but also with the government on issues of agriculture or agrarian issues and also education itself. So looking at the gaps, we thought, why not have something that is, is an expression of our own interests and our ideas and approaches. So I took premature retirement and we initiated this. So Punarchit means rethink. Punar is re, chit is think. It's a Kannada word. Basically, the emphasis is on new ways of learning, of sharing, and also living. But it's a way in which our primary goal is for many of us who came from, sort of upper class, urban, very privileged backgrounds, to question our own privilege and to say that coming out from such a system, we have, we have been beneficiaries, but not really. The return back has been very inadequate on our part. So why not we look at some ways in which we give back to society also? So this was why we started this. To rethink, we focused our flagship program is called the Integrated Learning Program, or Samagraha. In Kannada, Samagraha means integrated. Kalike is learning, Karikrama program. And it looks at, it seeks to cater to rural adolescents who either pass their 10th standard or even those who fail. We encourage those who fail to come in. And it provides a learning program which has 4 modules: ecology and agriculture. The second is social issues, learning about gender, religion, caste, democracy, all that. Third is preparing them to become leaders in their villages, understanding the panchayat system, to understanding democracy, and gaining leadership skills to speak, to read, take on people's issues, represent people, etc. And fourthly, we look a lot at personality, what we call self-realization, mostly because they come from such marginal communities in which inhibition, discrimination, humiliation are really their everyday experiences. And this we found after really interacting with a lot of youth. So the 4th module is mostly about singing. It's about theater which they form on their own, making little skits, speaking publicly, but also doing fun things, games, etc. But coming out of that inhibited physical self, the inhibited social self, giving voice to their own ideas, learning to mix with gender, which is, very prohibited in rural areas. So basically, really crafting themselves to have both voice and presence in their own society. So these are the 4 modules. And we don't have textbooks. We say your surrounding is your textbook. We don't have exams. We say no pass, no fail. It's correction. We give little homework, we don't have exams. They do it and we correct and correct till they get it right. Whatever essays they write or how to write essays, how to write a letter to a newspaper, how to make a complaint, how to petition your local leader, your MLA or MP. These are very practical everyday things which they do. How to observe the state of your lake, how to make sure the water is adequate or clean. These are some of the everyday things they take. Finally, I think they put up a theater, a play on any theme they like, and the graduation is a play that they put up and which they get some certificates and somebody comes. We don't have VIPs, big people coming. It's somebody whom we respect and whom somebody they like also, and they want to be seen with, and they choose the person and somebody comes. So that's how it concludes. After which is some of the real learning starts, because then we have to handhold them through the years. Many don't stay engaged. Girls who get married are shuttered away. They really are not allowed to engage with us. We've had that problem. Many boys migrate out because families are not able to sustain them on the meager land they have, or the labor cost, and whatever they earn is inadequate. Some of them migrate out, go to distant places. Only a handful really are sustained. Like we have some who have been with us for 4 or 5 years after the course, working the land, doing something. We have 2, 3 people who stood for elections. One person has won. Some of them have not won local elections, are now active in the panchayat system, which is what we wanted. We have girls gone out, got married, and come back to us. Very, very sort of empowered, very conscious of being active thing. But we've also lost contact with large numbers. People who don't, they also bear this burden of not living up to these expectations, and that is something we're also working on. Apart from this, we have land, we have 7 acres. We took a very degraded piece of land and we've conserved it, we've restored it. Rewilding part, we have a cultivation part, and we have a small learning space there, a seed bank. But basically, it's also where children, local government school children, other children come. They learn about soil, seeds, but they also learn about themselves, how to integrate. But particularly because labor, the lack of respect for labor is a key issue, and the lack of respect for local knowledge is thing. We look at knowledge and labor as very important. And to the local people, we always tell them this land does not belong to us, to the trust, it's community. So the idea of land, because everywhere land is treated as a commodity, we keep saying that land is a community asset. It belongs to everybody. You have to also be responsible for it. So basically, we've been trying to have this new kinds of relationship to land, to understanding, to using it. And land is not something you just pump in pesticides and hybrid seeds and get out all these high productive grains and which you sell in the market, but it also needs to be nurtured. So the symbiotic relationship between land and humans, that if you look after land well, it gives you good food, it also nourishes you. You don't have to keep running to the hospital. So that kind of symbiotic relationship is something that we're really struggling to get that through. Because as you know, mainstream agriculture is now really about productivity and marketing, etc., and commercial crops, not even local stuff. So these are just some of the programs we're doing. It's very small. It's very limited to small batches of students. We are not into scale at all. We don't believe in scale. But we are also learning. It's not like we have a blueprint and we know everything. We're also struggling every day to get all this together and to present it in a meaningful way to make Punarchith really a meaningful learning experience.
I think one such initiative is Punarchith Collective, of which you are a part of. Could you tell us something more about it?
Yeah. We started this, a group of us, about 5 of us, mostly because we felt very frustrated working in mainstream institutions, academic research work, but also with the government on issues of agriculture or agrarian issues and also education itself. So looking at the gaps, we thought, why not have something that is, is an expression of our own interests and our ideas and approaches. So I took premature retirement, and we initiated this. So Punarchith means rethink. Punar is re, chit is think. It's a Kannada word. Basically, the emphasis is on new ways of learning, of sharing, and also living. But it's a way in which our primary goal is for many of us who came from, sort of upper class, urban, very privileged backgrounds, to question our own privilege and to say that coming out from such a system, we have, we have been beneficiaries, but not really. The return back has been very inadequate on our part. So why not we look at some ways in which we give back to society also? So this was why we started this. To rethink, we focused our flagship program is called the Integrated Learning Program, or Samagraha. In Kannada, Samagraha means integrated. Kalike is learning, Karikrama program. And it looks at, it seeks to cater to rural adolescents who either pass their 10th standard or even those who fail. We encourage those who fail to come in. And it provides a learning program which has 4 modules: ecology and agriculture. The second is social issues, learning about gender, religion, caste, democracy, all that. Third is preparing them to become leaders in their villages, understanding the panchayat system, to understanding democracy, and gaining leadership skills to speak, to read, take on people's issues, represent people, etc. And fourthly, we look a lot at personality, what we call self-realization, mostly because they come from such marginal communities in which inhibition, discrimination, humiliation are really their everyday experiences. And this we found after really interacting with a lot of youth. So the 4th module is mostly about singing. It's about theater which they form on their own, making little skits, speaking publicly, but also doing fun things, games, etc. But coming out of that inhibited physical self, the inhibited social self, giving voice to their own ideas, learning to mix with gender, which is, very prohibited in rural areas. So basically, really crafting themselves to have both voice and presence in their own society. So these are the 4 modules. And we don't have textbooks. We say your surrounding is your textbook. We don't have exams. We say no pass, no fail. It's correction. We give little homework. We don't have exams. They do it and we correct till they get it right. Whatever essays they write or how to write essays, how to write a letter to a newspaper, how to make a complaint, how to petition your local leader, your MLA or MP. These are very practical everyday things which they do. How to observe the state of your lake, how to make sure the water is adequate or clean. These are some of the everyday things they take. Finally, they put up a theater, a play on any theme they like, and the graduation is a play that they put up and which they get some certificates and somebody comes. We don't have VIPs, big people coming. It's somebody whom we respect and whom somebody they like also, and they want to be seen with, and they choose the person and somebody comes. So that's how it concludes. After which is some of the real learning starts, because then we have to handhold them through the years. Many don't stay engaged. Girls who get married are shuttered away. They really are not allowed to engage with us. We've had that problem. Many boys migrate out because families are not able to sustain them on the meager land they have, or the labor cost, and whatever they earn is inadequate. Some of them migrate out, go to distant places. Only a handful really are sustained. Like we have some who have been with us for 4 or 5 years after the course, working the land, doing something. We have 2, 3 people who stood for elections. One person has won. Some of them have not won local elections, are now active in the panchayat system, which is what we wanted. We have girls gone out, got married, and come back to us. Very, very sort of empowered, very conscious of being active thing. But we've also lost contact with large numbers. People who don't, they also bear this burden of not living up to these expectations, and that is something we're also working on. Apart from this, we have land, we have 7 acres. We took a very degraded piece of land and we've conserved it, we've restored it. Rewilding part, we have a cultivation part, and we have a small learning space there, a seed bank. But basically, it's also where children, local government school children, other children come. They learn about soil, seeds, but they also learn about themselves, how to integrate. But particularly because labor, the lack of respect for labor was a key issue, and the lack of respect for local knowledge is thing. We look at knowledge and labor as very important. And to the local people, we always tell them this land does not belong to us, to the trust, it's community. So the idea of land, because everywhere land is treated as a commodity, we keep saying that land is a community asset, it belongs to everybody, and you have to be responsible for it. So basically, we've been trying to have this new kinds of relationship to land, to understanding, to using it. And land is not something you just pump in pesticides and hybrid seeds and get out all these high productive grains and which you sell in the market, but it also needs to be nurtured. So the symbiotic relationship between land and humans, that if you look after land well, it gives you good food, it also nourishes you. You don't have to keep running to the hospital. So that kind of symbiotic relationship is something that we're really struggling to get that through. Because as you know, mainstream agriculture is now really about productivity and marketing, etc., and commercial crops, not even local stuff. So these are just some of the programs we're doing. It's very small. It's very limited to small batches of students. We are not into scale at all. We don't believe in scale. But we are also learning. It's not like we have a blueprint and we know everything. We're also struggling every day to get all this together and to present it in a meaningful way to make Punarchith really a meaningful learning experience. Yeah, sort of family is unusual in many ways, but also, not uh, not radical enough to question the privileges we've had. They would all, want to endorse property and wealth and status. All of them would do that. Uh, but how would I say it? Over the years, I mean, I come from a landed family from Karnataka. Mm, my parents did give a lot of importance to education, but also there was a lot of importance given to status, high status, and they themselves were very highly upwardly mobile. But within that, my father was quite radical in the ways in which he handled people around him. He was very much into democracy, to enabling people. He treated people especially well, and many people remembered him for that. So maybe that was a marker. But for me, it was traveling, being in the US, traveling around, teaching anthropology, sociology, which is social anthropology, which I did in the US, reading about lives across the world, reading about capitalism, reading about the impact of industrial agriculture, but also reading about the educational system. So it was really reading, thinking, looking at many lives. So it was sort of various kind of instances. But something that really made me come out of this privilege was I was working at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. It's a private institution within the IISc campus in Bangalore. It was founded as an interdisciplinary place, and when I joined it, we were all kind of young graduates with doctorates and stuff like that. But over the years, it became much more of a science place where what was privileged was high science, which was primarily defense and space and nuclear, in which social scientists, we were supposed to be like handmaidens to big science, to big technology, to promote big science and technology, which I absolutely abhorred. It did not gel with me. And I really began to question my own position, my career. I did not want just a career. I mean, it was very comfortable, it was very plush, it was paid very well, also, but intellectually, emotionally, I was just very, very unhappy. And that's why I kind of said, I must think. And it was those very thoughts that having been educated and privileged, and you have a certain lifestyle, and more than that, you have a certain kind of recognition. What really is my impact? What am I doing with all this? am I just reproducing the same system? That's the question I ask myself. How different am I from whatever is within this I am surrounded with? Why would I not want to break out? And I had nothing to lose, to break out from it. So that was it. It was meant to be very small, and it's still very small, very experimental. I keep telling people when people approach us and say, why don't you scale up? I say, we will not scale up because this is meant to be small. It cannot, it'll lose its meaning when it's made mass. Um, so that's why it's still a struggle. It's a learning process even for me and for my colleagues. We don't have a set agenda. We don't know, yes, this is exactly what we want to do. We've done things, we've tweaked it, we've changed it, we alter it. We talk a lot to people. So also just being in the village has helped a lot. We live in the village. It's a very large village. We don't live in an isolated. We don't have a campus as such. We live in a rented house, rented premises. But around us, we see what is happening. We were witness to COVID, to what it did. So it's really the way in which the larger nation treats different societies, the way in which different people, strategize in their lives, and the kind of struggles people have is what really teaches us. Is then becomes the guidepost. For example, we never imagined we would be doing kind of relief work for 2 years, COVID, it was so disruptive that we would have to run a mobile, helpline and get medicines and put information out in the language and handle people and then start doing distribution of food and medicines, things like that, counseling, etc. These were things which we never imagined, and as it hit so. But that was the thing that some of our students also rose up to that occasion to become, spokespersons who would, kind of speak against misinformation about COVID, etc. So those were the best lessons are learned from life. So that is what we are also trying to do.
Certainly. And one is this example when the crisis hit and how the students kind of, the ones who had been with Punarchith for some time, their response would have been a measure of the result of your collective in some sense. Other than that, when these students, especially the ones, boys or girls, when they stick around for a little longer than the others, those ones, when they go out, let's say, into a slightly bigger place, a bigger city, town, whatever, they're able to hold their ground. They now don't they seem more grounded and more confident in how they deal with things.
Yes, very much so. And it's a very small proportion. I would say not more
Sure.
than 10 to 15%
Sure.
of them. They do. For example, to just give you two examples, during demonetization, when it was announced, as you would know, within 24 hours there was a commission system where if you went to a store with a big note, they would say, "I will take my commission of 30% and not give you back that change." We had some of our girls who went to a medical store and told that person, "No, either you give us our full change back, or no, we will just walk out." So able to assert themselves in those situations of exploitation, which is what we've done many, skits and examples of scenarios. This is what will happen. How would you deal with it? So the fact, and it was girls much more than boys. We had an instance where they had all gone to a fair, and two of the students were Muslim girls wearing, had removed their burqas because they thought they were outside and nobody was watching there. And some of their fellow brothers, cousins saw them and went back. Hindu girls accompanied them with girls. Their parents had said, we all went together, and it was we who asked them to remove the burqa, and it was perfectly fine with us, and we will look after them, and they were not doing anything wrong, and convince the parents. So please continue sending them. Please don't punish them, that they did not. So and they did it completely on their own. They didn't even consult us. So we were very happy that they could assert themselves. So these are small instances where we think, we've been. So it's not just getting a livelihood, but really making your life more meaningful. For example, some of the girls who've come back to work with us, who've had children, who convinced their in-laws, I won't work, but I will do the housework. I will look after the kids. I'll look after you. I also want to go and work, things like that. So these have been small, heartening examples for us.
Beautiful. And would you have any insight on why more girls are able to assert themselves that way compared to boys?
I think these are the situations which girls face. Boys face exploitation, discrimination in slightly different ways. Uh, both which I gave you a thing. For example, uh, we know a boy who someone who was quite active with us. Thing he was cheated out of some, I don't know, some deal, some brick making deal or something like that. Uh, but at least he didn't keep it to himself. He came back, he asked us, and he said, "Where do I complain? I want to make a complaint. Should I go to the police? Should I see a lawyer?" So at least he consulted us. So the situations are different. What we see much more with girls are the everyday exploitation and the everyday humiliation. For example, they face it much more, the humiliation within the families. For example, it was again a girl who was told by her grandfather, "Oh, you learn to speak, talk back. This is not good. You learn to talk back." So for her to then say, "Yes, I'm also, asserting my rights." They were trying to marry her off, and she questioned that, and she questioned what they were looking for. She said, "No, it's my life. I have to ask these questions because that will impact me. Why should I keep quiet?" So these are some of the instances. But boys really don't face most of these. There are other instances that they do face, though, especially if they're low rank, and are very disadvantaged.
There is this interesting situation to observe here, which happens at all levels, I think. When self assertion, if it's not done in a proper articulate way, can be misinterpreted as rebellion, right? It could be fault on both parties. The
Yes,
person
yes.
conveying it, the person understanding it is shocked by this new change of events. So, yes.
Mhm. Yes, and it can become counterproductive. Yes, yeah, you're very right. And this is something that we work on, and we have really an expert who works with them on these issues. For example, we do especially for girls when they are negotiating issues about marriage, about going out for work, or for just to challenge where they are overburdened with housework, to say, "Okay, please don't make me do all this work. Give me a little time for myself," etc. We They go through processes, some kind of scenarios through skits, etc. How should they negotiate this? So I think in many ways it has helped them. We know that they do negotiate it uh, in different ways. We've also have instances where boys have become sensitive to this. For example, there is an activity they do in which boys wear, on their clothes, on the pants and shirt, they wear saris. We just give them some old saris, and we ask them to, because your whole body language changes when you wear a sari. And what is it to be a woman in a sari, and what is it if they have to cover their heads and cover down, and how this kind of humiliation is really embodied on women. And what has been interesting is when the boys have told us about some of the changes, for example, many boys note this independent of the classes different. "I never used to wash my own plate, after they've eaten, but now I wash my own plate. I don't make my mother or my sister do it." Some boys who've said, "I never carrying water from the public tap to the home is a matter of shame for boys." Some boys have said, "Now I realize that I use the water. It's my responsibility also. I should also carry water." So small things like that in which gender sensitization has helped boys. Um, so that way there have been many examples, but overall it's not like large numbers of them have made these shifts, but a few of them have done that.
Certainly. And so I also derived my next set of questions from this talk you gave at the Azim Premji University, which was titled Child, Citizen, and the Nation. So I have a few questions here. I
Yeah.
think a good place to start would be if you can tell us how would you define a citizen, and then how does it apply to a child being one?
Yeah, a conventional definition is a citizen in a country, in a nation, is a person who has legal rights, not only to reside, but also legal rights over certain access and, uh, assets or resources within the nation and protection from the state primarily, who's recognized as a citizen. What has happened with children is that there is a common saying in India, a child of today is a citizen of tomorrow. So a child is not a citizen now. As a child, you're not a citizen. So although there is a whole regime of rights that are deployed, right now you have right to education, right to health, right to safety, right to food, right to shelter, you name it. But much of these are not realized, mostly because the vulnerable child is within a context, in a system in which those structures of disadvantage are not recognized. This largely accounts for the fact that the most basic right of a child, which is to nutritious food, is denied to such a large number, like 36%, 40% of children don't have nutritious food. So you can't then just say, okay, even if you say every child should have, how do you deploy it? Unless those structural issues are addressed. That is what is not happening. The child is seen as someone to whom some amounts of this, that, XYZ should be given, but it's not really a systemic change that is taking place. So large numbers of children continue to fall between the cracks of the system. For example, you could have Anganwadis, but those Anganwadis don't, function well. You would have schools where the child is supposed to get a midday meal, but it's a dysfunctional school, so the child may not even want to go there, or the meal is never served, or it's a poor quality meal. So the regulatory mechanisms are not there, but mostly the structural change has not taken place. Those shifts, because large numbers of that conditions of disadvantage are maintained and reproduced. So that is why I have seen, and in that lecture I explained that the child citizen in the nation state is mostly a sacrificial subject. We sacrifice our children in so many ways, by not regulating the food distribution properly, by not having good institutions, by educational institutions not having free and easily accessible healthcare systems. We don't have proper regulatory systems which would address large amounts of abuse. It accounts for why the most glaring forms of violence that we see against children, which is rape, which is so common, which is reported almost every day from across the country. So that vulnerability is not addressed at all. So that was what basically I was trying to look at in that lecture.
So, these rights, at what age do people generally become conscious that they have these rights? They recognize they're the people of a nation, they know that they're Indians, but when do they come of age in terms of realizing what rights they have? Is there any data on that? Or just do we
No, I'm
take it
not
for
aware of
granted?
data. Most people don't. I mean, the whole thing of citizenship is now seen as, when you're 18, you have the right to vote.
Yeah.
All political parties focus on youth because there's such a large proportion of our population now. And there is some amount of assertion about, your voting rights, etc. Because it's also encash now. Votes are sold. I mean, political parties buy votes, and people are selling their votes. So that is. But overall, the idea of rights, the rights regime, is its constitutional changes are made and legalese it's pronounced, but those are not translated onto the ground level at all. Ground realities are very poor. For example, if my right is violated, where do I go? Who addresses it? There is no system that makes it easy for you to say my right is violated, and therefore let me have redressal of this violation. Where is that system? Even the most well-heeled person is afraid now to approach a system for redressal, for legal justice itself, or even social justice. So these are, again, these are some sort of larger macro dysfunctionalities of the system. For example, our political democracy is not translated into social democracy, no? Cultural democracy. Where do we respect each other? Where is any sense of equality in the society itself? So all these are then, both translated into and manifested at these levels of gross violence that we see, especially against children.
In the same talk, you also stressed on the importance of studying children. You spoke
Yeah,
of course, in terms of policies.
yeah.
Could you please elaborate on that?
One studies of children were very few and far between until a few years ago. It's only now that you have childhood studies or studying children has a body of knowledge in disciplines itself. Otherwise, I think child was just an appendage to the mother. Mother and child welfare you have. You would not have children's welfare by itself. Also, the fact that it took so long for us to pass the right to education, which is not, it was only in 2009 it was passed, so many decades after independence. But to study children, I think we also needed to situate them within those very specific contexts. One of the things which I've not looked at adequately, but I feel one should have done is in relation to studying children is also studying children of very affluent families, because affluence does not assure you that your child is treated well, or children of affluent families are treated well. They are also under tremendous pressure. So there is what a friend of mine calls afflictions of affluence. Affluence also has its problems. So we are seeing that manifest. For example, depression and all kinds of eating disorders among children of affluent families, tendency to commit suicide, violence that they perpetrate. For a lot of students from very, the new kind of plush private universities or even high schools that you're seeing are reporting very high levels of stress among these children. So I think we need to study children at various class levels also, not just the poor disadvantaged child or the middle class child, but also the affluent child, because those not so much bodies, has lifestyles and practices and ideas and institutions that the affluent have become models for others, and which then kind of uh, filters down into the other strata of societies. So if we address it in those areas and also highlight where the problems are, I think it would help other children also. For example, a very simple example is advertising which targets children, affluent children, eat this chocolate or this ice cream. But, and, what does it mean for the other children who would buy it at some great cost, but it's really detrimental to their health also. So these are, I think, all the various contexts that we need to study children, but we need to study them in relationship to the macro structures, what is happening, to policies, to long-term impacts.
And this talk that I just mentioned, it was followed by the launch of this book titled "Childhoods in India: Traditions, Trends, and Transformation." And this talks about policies and practices around working with children based on a singular model of the ideal child rooted in certain Western traditions. This is a synopsis I picked up. I can share the link from where I picked this up. Now, why I quoted this specifically is to understand from you this from a sociological lens. Do you have anything to say on what an ideal child is, or this whole concept is? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No. Actually, I think the book takes on this idea of promoting the ideal child, of the singular modular way in which the ideal childhood was the Western childhood. It also looks at childhood in various contexts. It doesn't promote this idea of the ideal child or childhood at all. That's what the book is about. It's edited by somebody who I know, a very well-known child psychologist, Professor Saraswati. And that is what much of her work has been about.
So, in terms of what her findings have been, would you say with the findings of the child psychologist would play a role in the kind of policies that can found? Because we are looking at children when we see them as citizens or try to see them as citizens, we're seeing a from a sociological lens, but there's also a psychological lens
Yeah.
to it, right? So there is a marriage of these
Yes.
insights which would be fruitful. Yes.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, so Professor Saraswati and some others who work with her have been arguing that you cannot have uh, uh, child psychology cannot be based on this Western, model. So that they are also coming from this cultural psychologies. Different cultures would have different childhoods of socializing children, etc. And therefore, you need to look at different kinds of psychologies also.
Yeah.
So you cannot treat children with a singular kind of psychology. Basically, of course, now all of this has gained currency even for general psychology or in general counseling. That society also impacts your mindset. So there is this whole thing of cultural psychology, which is what they have looked at. Yeah.
So I also read that the book represents four major themes. Among them, mythology and culture I feel, are among the most readily available resources across Indian households. Mythology and culture.
Yeah.
Would you be able to say
Yeah.
that if you have any thoughts on how our mythologies can be used by us to become better parents to our children and perhaps even formulate better policies for children? Yeah.
Yeah. Disha, actually, I shouldn't represent these authors because I was not an author at all of the book. But I just want to clarify in that case of mythologies, there is an essay in that book which is written by someone called Jane Sahi, a well known educator who lives outside Bangalore. And there, I was in the sessions when this book was being developed. She looks at the role of the way in which Krishna, baby Krishna is portrayed in Hindu mythology, and the importance that was given to little Krishna. He's a prankster. He looks at there is a section where she looks at this thing of when Radha one day opens she Krishna has stolen some butter, so she asks him to open his mouth, and she sees the whole world in his mouth. There is that episode. Jane has worked on that to see how a child uh, is emblematic of the whole world. He or she is all encompassing, and Radha is so taken aback that then she realizes how precious this child is, and therefore reinforcing the importance of children, going against this ideas that Hindus don't know how to look after children, or they abuse them, or things. So looking at mythologies that upheld children as precious and important and sacred also. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. I think I just have a few more questions left to ask you. Would you be able to tell us something about how your work as a sociologist, if it has been able to tell you anything about human beings, how we are, and the kind of world that we live in?
That's a tough one. So, as a sociologist, as I say, I think human beings are made much more by society than we would like to recognize. And not that I don't give importance to the role of agency or to the way individuals can craft themselves. My sociological approach to personhood is to say that we are crafted much more as children than we would, and the stamp that society places on us, both psychologically and socially, is much more significant than what we realize. But as a sociologist, therefore, it's also important to realize, especially in our kind of context, to see the way in which social backgrounds are very important to understanding personalities. We often tend to see a person A, B, C as, she is angry type or a gentle, sweet kind, haughty or intelligent, anything, we stereotype people. we see them as just individuals standing alone, but we often don't see their backgrounds that has gone to making them. So the social makeup of a person has a longer history and more depth to it. And therefore, understanding human beings requires us to understand their backgrounds, their experiences, their own, mindsets. You could have two two people from the same family who have had completely different experiences and therefore come out as very different individuals also. So that needs, so if understanding is the emphasis, that is what we should do. That is why when I spoke about pedagogies, I talked about empathy also. And this is very difficult to do. How we can't constantly be empathetic to everybody we see around ourselves. But understanding any individual or any society helps us even reconcile with those differences. Basically, the importance of society is of understanding the stamp of a society is key to understanding people in their backgrounds, to understanding their personalities have been forged from not only their backgrounds but also from their varied experiences, the kind of positions, kind of locations they've come from, and the kinds of encounters that they would have had in their life.
That's wonderful, Professor. And with that, we can conclude our conversation. And I'd just like to thank you once again for coming on Tattva and giving us your time, sharing your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My conversation with Professor Vasavi helped reinforce the impact that social backgrounds have in shaping personalities, that to overlook this impact and to place the blame or the credit entirely on an individual whom we may like or dislike can bring down the overall quality of our personal and social judgment and understanding. It will be wonderful to know your thoughts on the conversation and if it inspired your worldview in any way. Thanks for being here. I will see you soon with another interesting mind, demystifying another interesting subject. Until then, take care.